After the killing of George Floyd by a white police officer in Minneapolis, adding to the list of black and ethnic minorities killed completely unlawfully in the US and across the world, it is only right to notice our own ignorance towards racism. As a business channel, I want to show how racism in the workplace affects minority employees. I want to educate about systemic racism with the aim to continue raising awareness for the issue while challenging the ideologies underpinning it. 42% of US employees have experienced or seen racism in the workplace. This is simply horrific. The fact that so many have experienced and seen the issue explains why black and minority workers are forced to adjust their actions and amend their choices due to examples of racism. Furthermore, it immediately proves to anyone saying that racism isn't a problem anymore, yes, there are actually people who think that they are wrong. If you're elsewhere thinking, yeah, but that's the US, we're fine, you'd also be wrong. The global figure is 30%, meaning there is still huge work to be done across the world. 55% of US employees stated that they believe their company should do more for diversity and inclusion. If more than half your workforce is doubtful about your ability to handle a systemic level of racism, something's terribly wrong. The underlying problem here, however, is the lack of action from the unaffected. I would be interested to see how many of that 55% are made up of white people, and how many of those white people actually made a stand about the issue in question. It is of paramount importance that we stand up against racism regardless of our own race. It will surprise you how many are still of the belief that not being racist is just as effective as being anti-racist. A survey from the University of Manchester showed that 40% of those who reported an incident regarding racist abuse at work were either ignored or identified as a troublemaker. This is why we all need to stand up against it. If I was to take a stab at why that happened, I'd say this is due to the fact that the person dealing with the issue was white, and as such dismissed it, given they've never experienced such treatment in their life. That's just my guess. That's white privilege, which has been ingrained in society for the entirety of civilized life. Over 50 years ago, there was the introduction of the Race Relations Amendment Act, outlawing racial discrimination in the workplace. So, it's illegal. However, 70% of those surveyed by the University of Manchester stated they have experienced racial abuse, and 60% said they'd been unfairly treated by an employer due to a race-related issue. Passing another act against racism isn't going to fix it. That's where the problem lies. Only by educating and noticing your own ignorance towards it will make a change. What people fail to understand are the enormous benefits of diversity. Let's go to the US again. 10% of C-suite roles are held by men of colour, with 4% held by women of colour. This compares to 68% and 18% of white men and women respectively. It can be assumed that, while I'm not saying no white people will be interested in inclusion programs, it's more likely that better diversity and inclusion practices will be put into place by the first group, simply due to their experiences with the issue. Research shows that these programs massively benefit companies, with a report in the Harvard Business Review showing that diverse companies are more innovative, objective, and careful. Finally, the cost, both productive and financial, of discrimination in the workplace is ridiculous. If there was no discrimination, UK GDP would be 7% higher. White people of similar skill sets and levels in the UK earn between £67 and £209 a week more than black, Asian, or minority ethnic workers. There's that privilege again. Productivity-wise, any employee who feels excluded sees their level drop 25%. I reckon racist abuse might make someone feel pretty fucking excluded. So why does it persist so significantly? Well, that's systemic racism. The mistreatment of minorities throughout history has put them at a massive disadvantage. In the past, your race would mean you might not be able to get a job that paid enough to cover tuition. That would mean you can never help your children experience a better education and consequent life. That would mean you're stuck in a system that completely abandons you based on the colour of your skin. That's something no white person has ever experienced. If you've been put at a handicap your whole life, you can't simply be expected to bounce back with no help whatsoever. Look at Stormzy's scholarship programme, labelled racist for being only for black students. People were saying how racist it was because you never see that sort of scholarship for white students. Well, there is that sort of scholarship for white students. It's called society. Another example is that half of black and Hispanic workers consider diversity practices when looking for a job. Conversely, only 27% of whites do, because they don't have to worry about themselves being mistreated because of the colour of their skin. It also paints a picture of almost 75% of white workers not looking out for issues of racism simply because it doesn't affect them. The cause of the continuing systemic racism comes from ignorance and constant get-out-of-jail-free cards. The number of white police officers who have been acquitted after killing unarmed and unthreatening black people is shocking. You know what the sentence was for the black officer who accidentally shot a white woman? 12.5 years. And if none of that has convinced you, look at the difference in treatment between George Floyd, pinned against the ground by the knee that eventually killed him, and Dylan Roof, who killed 9 black people in the Charleston shooting, arrested peacefully. Recognising your ignorance and changing for the better is not a weakness. Noticing when you're wrong and admitting it is not a weakness. I am not black, and I'm ashamed it's taken me this long to correct my ignorances. Black lives matter. Justice for George Floyd.